At least 59 people were killed, and more than 500 injured, after shooter Stephen Paddock opened fire at a music festival in Las Vegas on Sunday night. As the U.S. comes to terms with another horrific massacre, one of the worst in recent American history, people are rightly asking how this was able to happen. Paddock owned 43 guns, and was surrounded by 23 of them as he opened fire from his 32nd floor hotel room in Vegas. The U.S.'s lax gun control laws have long been a source of grief, and, many claim, are the reason that the country's gun death toll is so high. However, gun ownership is so deeply ingrained in parts of American culture, and even its constitution, that it is proving almost impossible to get rid of, or even restrict. At the time of writing, the U.S. owns half of all of the civilian-owned guns in the world. 35% of the country's citizens say they grew up with guns. For every 100 people in the U.S., there are 88 guns, and many states allow citizens to openly carry their guns around, often without needing a permit. In Nevada, where Paddock struck, there are almost no restrictions on who can own and carry guns. You don't need a permit to buy, own or carry a rifle or a shotgun in Nevada. But Nevada is far from an anomaly. South Carolina, for example, has the same general gun laws as Nevada. People don't need permits or licenses to buy, own or carry rifles and shotguns. The South Carolina city of Charleston was hit by tragedy in 2015 when white supremacist Dylan Roof took a loaded gun into an historic black church and opened fire on its African American parishioners. Even states such as Oregon and Washington, home to the seemingly progressive hubs of Portland and Seattle, take a similarly libertarian approach to gun control. And with gun ownership so stubbornly embedded, so too are fatal shootings. This year alone, in 2017, a total of 11,690 people in the U.S. have already been shot dead. Of those, 2,439 were teenagers between the ages of 12 and 17. Another 546 were children between the ages of newborn and 11. And although Vegas is the deadliest, it is far from the only mass shooting to have happened this year. In fact, there have been 273 mass shootings so far, and at the time of writing, there have only been 275 days in the year. That means that there have only been 2 days in 2017 on which there wasn't a mass shooting. No president in recent history has grieved so openly for the victims of such shootings as Barack Obama. Speaking in the wake of the Newtown Elementary School massacre in Connecticut, Obama openly wept, not just for the lives cruelly taken, but for his powerlessness to do anything about it. We are going to have to come together and take meaningful action to prevent more tragedies like this, he said, tears on his face. Regardless of the politics. Sadly, even the deaths of 20 young children couldn't motivate Congress to pass gun control laws. Obama famously struggled to pass any meaningful, dramatic gun reform through a stubborn Congress, instead making do with tightening up existing laws. There is little more that Obama could have done on gun control, UCLA constitutional law professor Adam Winkler told PolitiFact. The president's power is limited, and the NRA wrote the laws to restrict what the executive can do. The NRA that is, the National Rifle Association, is another major, incredibly influential spanner in the works of gun control. Over the last 42 years, the NRA has held a tight grip on the White House, and now, its hold is only likely to get stronger. In 1975, the group established its lobbying arm, the Institute for Legislative Action, ILA, to nullify the Gun Control Act that had been passed in 1968. Under the GCA, convicted felons, drug users and people with mental health problems were not allowed to buy guns, and all firearms dealers had to obtain licenses. There were also restrictions on interstate sales, and citizens had to be at least 21 before they could legally buy a handgun. In 1986, then-President Ronald Reagan, who was also an NRA member, signed the Firearm Owners Protection Act, a law which eased some of the penalties of the GCA, and banned a federal registry of gun owners. But opposition started to grow in 1981, when a presidential assassination gone awry meant that Reagan's press secretary James Brady was almost shot dead. You can begin to see a sea change of attitudes during this time, Sarah Brady, James Brady's wife, told MSNBC. The NRA was fighting against the cop-killing bullets and plastic guns, and we got into an alliance with law enforcement and we just got together and said, what's the first thing we should do? And we all said, background checks. The following decade, Brady proposed a new bill colloquially known as the Brady Bill - an act that would create a system of federal background checks for purchases from federally licensed gun dealers. In 1993, under Clinton, it was signed into law. Presidents George Bush Sr. and Jr. also had complicated relationships with the NRA. In 1993, George H.W. Bush wrote a letter to the NRA resigning his life membership in the wake of the Oklahoma City bombing. Then 11 years later, in 2004, his son George W. Bush said that he believed that law-abiding citizens ought to be able to own a gun, but that he was also in favor of background checks to make sure that guns don't get in the hands of people that shouldn't have them. Of course, background checks can only go so far. Paddock, for example, was a supposed property millionaire with no known criminal history. But things looked to get much worse under Donald Trump, who was the most pro-NRA president the U.S. has ever had. In April, Trump proudly declared to a room full of NRA members, the 8-year assault on your Second Amendment freedoms has come to a crashing end. He also assured the association that it now has a true friend and champion in the White House. Just 2 months earlier, in February, Trump signed a resolution blocking an Obama-era rule that would have prevented around 75,000 people with known mental disorders buying guns. It was one of the measures put forward by Obama in the wake of the Newtown massacre. Coincidentally, the NRA donated more to Trump's presidential campaign last year than to any other president in American history, giving him a monumental $30 million. As well as funding presidential campaigns, the NRA puts a significant amount of money into blocking public health research into gun injuries and deaths. In 2014, one Dr. Garan Wintemute, ended up donating $1.1 million of his own money into his research, after Congress and the NRA pressured the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, to stop funding his work on gun violence. Dr. Wintemute is a professor of emergency medicine, who ran the Violence Prevention Research Program at the University of California, Davis. According to ProPublica, he is one of around 12 researchers in the whole country who still focus full-time on firearms violence. When the CDC ended his funding, he was looking at risk factors for criminal activity among people who had legally purchased handguns. By the time Dr. Wintemute was forced to empty his own pockets to keep his study alive, federal funding for gun violence research had already been restricted for almost 2 decades. President Obama reportedly urged Congress to allocate $10 million for new research after the Newtown massacre, but House Republicans refused to approve it. And this was with the gun control advocate in the White House. With Trump as president, gun control is fast becoming the very large and deadly elephant in the room. His address delivered in the wake of the Las Vegas massacre, despite ostensibly being full of sympathy for the victims, neglected to mention gun control even once. The NRA, as it usually does after mass shootings, has gone eerily quiet on social media. Over the next 4, or potentially even 8, years, U.S. gun control activists are going to have to fight even harder to get their voices heard, no matter how many lives are lost in the process.